it's up to you. I hope you had fruitful conversations during lunch at your tables, and I also hope that you enjoyed our student spotlights. Students are at the heart of everything we do at College Promise, and it's always inspirational to be reminded of the impact of the work, the real-life impact. So for our next session, we are going to have a discussion about how organizations in Arizona are collaborating to advance economic opportunity. First, we have Yanez, Senior Vice President of Community Engagement and Strategic Partnerships at the Helios Education Foundation. He leads Helios' staff engagement with the community and stakeholders to improve quality, access, and achievement across the birth to 16 education continuum, especially those in high-poverty Latino communities. He holds a bachelor's degree in government and Spanish from the University of Notre Dame and a master's degree in social work from Arizona State University. We have Rich Nickel, President and CEO of Education Forward Arizona. He has spent nearly 30 years working in the education space, helping students and families with financial need achieve their educational goals. Those efforts have strengthened his commitment to helping transform Arizona's education system in ways that ensure access to quality education for every student, from early learning all the way to college and career. He is a statewide leader in identifying and addressing practical and policy barriers to improving education, and he's a go-to source statewide and nationally, having presented and published extensively on these issues. Next, we have Roxanne Murphy, who's currently the Director of Postsecondary Attainment at the Arizona Board of Regents. In that role, she's responsible for overseeing and implementing strategies to enhance postsecondary education and achievement in the state. With her expertise and leadership, Roxanne works towards ensuring that students in Arizona have access to quality higher education opportunities, contributing to the state's educational and economic development goals. And to moderate the conversation, we have Rosie Cloud, which you know a lot about Rosie, but maybe some things you don't know. Rosie is a first-generation American, and in addition to being a champion for College Promise, she spent 20 years in public service, everywhere from DOD to NATO to the Office of Management and Budget and the White House National Security and Domestic Policy Councils. This is sure to be a really interesting discussion, so please welcome our panel.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me? Yep. No? Can you hear me? Oh. Can you hear me? All right, better. Thank you so much. I know after lunch is tough, but I got to tell you, I think you're in for a treat with Arizona. As we kick off, I want to give you a little context of how we ended up here and why the folks on the table are here. In 2020, as we were coming out of the isolation of COVID, College Promise National got invited to Arizona specifically because Mayor Giles was pulling together mayors from across the country. He had a trusted partner in Rich, and Rich was pulling together some great folks and really talking about the value proposition and strategy coming out. And when I showed up, and I got to tell you, if you're part of College Promise and you're on the road a lot, you hear a lot of pitches, you hear a lot of briefings, you get a lot of conversations, all varying levels. But Rich's conversation really hit me because it was the first time that I could hear all of the elements we heard from Bill Fox, all of the elements we heard from different College Promise programs and Randy in one location, starting to inform mayors and leaders and moving the information forward. And beside him were real partners in a state, frankly, that is thinking through its approach for a statewide model, but very committed to advancing opportunity for its people. And so, Rich, I just want to say thank you for coming. Thank you for all three of you for joining us here today. But I would love for you to have the conversation I got to hear with the mayors and give us a little bit of that overview, at least some insights as to what is happening in Arizona and what is the landscape.
Well, thank you for that. I'm actually a little embarrassed by the nice introduction, and I'm happy to be here. For those of you in the room who are from Tennessee, you might think I sound a little bit like you. I actually was in Kentucky, in Frankfort, Kentucky, until about 20 years ago when we went to Arizona. So when I come back to this part of the state, I've certainly never lost the accent, but when I come back to the state, I regain it a little bit. So to make me a little less nervous, I'm going to stand up and flip through a couple of things, and you're not going to get the 45 minutes I gave Rosie. You're going to get the 7-minute version, which hopefully can help us out a little bit. So I think it's important first to kind of understand what Arizona looks like, and this is important to the rest of the conversation, so we need to start here. So Arizona has the 5th largest Latino population in the United States. We're very fast on our way to being a majority minority state. We're already there in our K-12 system for sure, with about half of our Arizona's K-12 system being Latino or of Hispanic descent. Super important to remember. So Arizona is one of the states in the country that doesn't really have an official plan for education at the government level, and this is a theme you're going to hear as we go through. What Arizona does have, and this gives people like us a real opportunity to be helpful, is we have a shared community vision and kind of milestones called the Arizona Education Progress Meter that lays out milestones against the continuum that people use when they're thinking strategically about how to move forward, when they want to measure where we are versus where the community thinks we should be. And so this has produced a lot of buy-in. For today's conversation, we're probably interested mostly on the bottom row. And one I'll point your attention to, because this is, we did a social media post the other day that says, forget ghosts and goblins. 47% of our high school graduates enrolling in college after high school is what we really should be scared of, right? Because that's the start of the unsustainable kind of future that Arizona is in right now if we don't do something about it. So the last number you saw on the former slide was our attainment number. We have a goal in Arizona called Achieve 60 AZ. That goal is that 60% of Arizonans will hold some type of credential, a certificate, a degree, high-value license by the time of 2030, and that's for our working age adults, 25 to 64. Post-secondary enrollment, education after high school, however your flavor is of saying that, is certainly stratified by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic situations in Arizona. The green line is white attainment in Arizona. The blue line at 48% is all, and the orange line is our Hispanic attainment rate right now. So the algebra of attainment that you're seeing here is that because we have a large and growing Hispanic population that has roughly half the attainment of their white peers, if we do not focus intensely on increasing attainment for our Hispanic and Latino audience, then our state not only cannot grow in its goal, we have to go down. It's a math problem, right? So we know that, and we're committed to that, and a lot of other people understand this, but like I heard some people say in Tennessee, discussion about the Tennessee legislature, our legislative body is not that always in tune to this kind of like moral, ethical imperative. You really have to hit them with the numbers, and especially the economic numbers, to get them to really be worried about things like this. So along the way, we also know to reach our goal, we have to have 500,000 net new degrees and certificates in Arizona by the end of 2030 to reach our goal. So we've kind of shifted from talking about the percentage to talking about how many degrees and workforce certifications, licenses we need to get there. This seems to be working slightly better in messaging because it's a number that people can actually talk about. One of the issues we're having is this kind of like divisive and false narrative that I think a lot of us are facing in our states. So we decided to, along with our partners at Helios Education Foundation, we commissioned what I would call a landmark economic impact report on the benefits of a more educated Arizona. We learned some things here. None will be a surprise to you. The numbers may be surprising. That is, certainly individuals benefit from increased attainment. We all know why. We make more money, our families do better. There's also gigantic social savings and investments to be made by increased attainment. Just for instance, you heard somebody mention the prison population this morning. You may or may not know that 99% of the U.S. prison population has never taken one class after high school. 99%. So when you have highly educated communities, you don't subsidize housing, you don't subsidize food, you don't subsidize childcare, you don't subsidize health, you don't use the justice system. It frees up a lot of money for parks and other things that your community really wants. And then, of course, the state has massive fiscal gains because of the tax dollars that are paid. A couple of facts here in Arizona: you make about 3 times more with a bachelor's degree than you do if you have a high school diploma. Some of the interesting things we heard, or we found out, was that if we can increase higher education enrollment by 20% in participation across our state, $5 billion is at stake. So we can produce $5 billion in economic gains every single year. We have that increase in Arizona. So the economics are overwhelmingly in our favor. But we also found out there's great power in parity. So if everybody in Arizona, ethnicity, race, gender, economic levels, were participating at the rate that the highest performers are today, 8.7 billion in economic gains for Arizona. So these numbers are massive. Undoubtable that this college, is college worth it, is answered through this. And we have tons of pathways in Arizona. So all kinds of options. So if you want to get some education after high school, there is a way to do it in Arizona. But still, we're hearing this divisive narrative, and this is part of what we're fighting. When we start talking about the value, even though we've proven it exists, some people still want to argue it doesn't exist, right? So this is a great example. On March 13th, we put out the kind of least. We said a lot without saying much here, on purpose. Does education after high school really matter? Data says absolutely yes for individuals, business, our communities, and our entire state. We didn't mention college. We didn't mention liberal, elite, brainwashing universities. Nothing like that. We got back over 100 responses. We had to delete them all. All. These 3 are like the 3 nicest ones I could show you. We have plenty of studies majors. We need plumbers, welders. We do. We need tons of those. We also need accountants and engineers and doctors, right? So, but this is what it's kind of turned into. We're having to produce some losers so we can have some winners. But we can't do that in this conversation. We also have this, college isn't for everybody gang that's out there, right? You know, like my mom says that. College isn't for everybody. I said, what are you really talking about? Was it for me? Was it for my sister? Like, who are the other kids it's not for, right? So I hate to hurt her feelings like that, but that's the questions we're asking when people go down this road. So if you're hearing that, one of the things we've kind of put together is this strategy. If people say yes, education after high school should be an option for everybody, they get to make the decision, then let's support that. If people want to argue about this, we ask a few simple questions. Who's it for? And usually the person we're talking to, it was certainly for their kid and them most of the time, but not for other kids, so it's who are those other kids? Who gets to decide that opportunity? Rosie's got some theories on that, but that's an important, who's the gateway keeper? And then also who's excluded? I think the data tells us who's excluded, right? It's people that don't look like the person that's giving them advice. It's the other kids. So we have to fight this narrative. Like, everybody in this room should refuse to accept this. And so here's the last thing I'll say before we kind of get the panel started. Here's the unsustainable kind of correlation, the dichotomy of Arizona. We have a red-hot economy because we have tons of chip makers coming. We have energy companies. We have healthcare. We have construction. We have tourism. So, it's a good economy now. We're also 45th in education and 45th in equality. So I would dare anybody to tell me how this is a sustainable future for Arizona And especially when you consider we only have 47% of high school graduates attending any type of post-secondary education after high school. So we also don't have a pipeline that's performing. So that's the landscape in Arizona, and I think the news gets better from here.
Thank you, Rich. I mean, I'm going to go back for a second to what Bill Fox said earlier today about Tennessee. I've got Graham back there, where you've got another big business-friendly state with a net negative in growth as far as population and these changes. Arizona, another what I would call red-hot state, lots of potential. Businesses are wanting to do it. But if your talent isn't there, what do you do? And I think when Rich had this conversation with the mayors, I think was it Casa Grande? I'm trying to remember. And, he got up, and I will never forget this, and many of you all, as you work in your communities, he got up and he basically said, I don't have time. I have precious little time because employers in my community that are lifting up my people are going to leave. They are giving me notice that if I can't crack the talent pipeline for them, they're not staying. Right? And he got it. And it was, I think every mayor in that table understood what he was saying, which is that there's an economic development, there's an economic underpinning to communities that is so tied to what we're doing. And if we're not connecting those conversations, I think we're losing a really important opportunity within the promise piece. Rich talked about Arizona and setting some of the stage. Roxanne has a really interesting perspective in that Arizona gets even more complex than we just said. There's a little bit more complexity, and I think you can talk a little bit about like defining how does college promise work currently in Arizona.
Can you hear me now? Yes? Should I hold it? I don't know. Yeah, okay. I'll hold it. Thanks. Thanks so much. I really appreciate being here, and I was actually telling Rosie last night that this feels a little surreal to me. Being here, being in Tennessee, talking about College Promise, hearing from Tennessee Promise earlier today. About 8 or 9 years ago, I visited Tennessee for the very first time, and I went to the National College Attainment Network conference. And I don't remember a whole lot about the conference, but I do remember the keynote, and it was actually about Tennessee Promise. And I remember sitting there and listening to the speaker, and the speaker said something that still resonates with me today, and that's, no longer are we going to ask students what they're going to do after high school. We now get the opportunity to ask students what they're going to do after college. And at that time, I was working side by side with students every single day. And so I got to hear what students' hopes and dreams were, right, for their future, with students wanting to go to college, and also knowing that the biggest barrier and biggest concern for students was how to pay for college. And I just remember thinking to myself, when will we get to say that in Arizona? So just excited to be here today, excited to talk about Arizona Promise. So thanks for having me. But I'll just say that I think, Promise kind of really started, well, it's been a concept for a while in Arizona, but really thinking about Achieve 60, which Rich was talking about here, and, the need and goal to have our state reach 60% attainment by 2030. And so I think that put a lot of pressure on our legislature to think about what they were going to do. The conversations from partners up here, like there was a lot of pressure to do something, and for our legislature to think about, were they actually going to help our state get to its goal? And so in 2021, the legislature had to decide. I mean, there had been bills before then talking about promise programs, but in 2021, I feel like it just took a turn. Like they had to decide, and so they had to think about, like, are they going to invest in Arizona students? Are we going to grow our pipeline from within? Are we going to ensure that students, Arizona students have the skills and knowledge that they need in order to be placed into jobs that are in high demand in Arizona and grow our economy? And so happy to say that, why we're here today too is that they did. They said yes. and the Arizona Promise program launched in 2021. And I think that it's really significant for two reasons. First is that this is the first time that Arizona had ever funded a state-based financial aid program. We had never funded, we're one of a few states that had never funded state, financial aid for students. So that was huge. And then the Arizona Promise program also is for our 4-year institutions, students looking to attend one of our 3 state ABOR institutions, Northern Arizona University, Arizona State University, and University of Arizona. And that's huge because we need all types of degrees in Arizona, but something that we know too is that 4-year degrees really matter in Arizona. We're talking about the jobs, that are needed for our state to thrive. And we know that 4-year degrees is part of that. And actually in our state, when we look at, for every 100 high school freshmen, only 8 of those students will go on to receive a 4-year degree in Arizona currently, as we are. And the projections for that for 2029, if we did nothing about it, is that it would maybe increase to 17 out of every 100 high school freshmen would go on to receive a 4-year degree. And we know that that's not enough. We actually have a net deficit when it comes to 4-year degrees, meaning that we have less 4-year degrees pumping into our working age, pipeline than those that are aging out of the 25 to 64 working age pipeline. So I think that that's really significant too, that it was focused on 4-year, and also just being thoughtful that, I'm talking about the Arizona Promise program, but we have a multitude of Promise programs within our local communities to support students going to one of our 10 community colleges. And so I think with, the modest amount of dollars that was provided for the first round of scholarships, we had to be really thoughtful about how to use those and support students who weren't going to have access to dollars to support them. So in spring 2022, the first cohort of students received the scholarship. So actually students that were currently in one of our 3 state institutions and met the eligibility criteria, they were awarded the scholarship in their spring semester. And so just to share about the Promise Program scholarship, it is a last dollar scholarship. And when it first launched, it actually was for students who had a $0 EFC. And so that was about 3,700 students that were in our 4-year post-secondary institutions. And so even this past year during the legislative session, we saw that change as well. So the eligibility criteria actually expanded to any Pell eligible student in Arizona. And so there's a lot more students now that are eligible for the Promise program. If we're actually just looking at, our high school pipeline, we have about 25,000 students that are on free or reduced price lunch as seniors. And so thinking about how many more students would be eligible for the Promise program now. So all to say that it's evolved even in the short time that it's been around. It's nowhere, near Tennessee yet, but I think we all are really hopeful that we'll get to a space eventually, right? So.
Thank you. And so adding to this conversation that you just talked about of what is Promise today, obviously there's a lot of attention on Arizona and the notion of, so how do you build upon what exists and scale it statewide in a way that resembles, statewide programs, more traditional statewide programs across the country. Rich, can you talk a little bit about your ecosystem and Promise, and what is your vision for expanding? What's that next maturity step for the state?
Yes, there's a lot going on in Arizona right now. I think what Roxanne said is really true, and it's a great starting point, which is Arizona had literally never invested direct state dollars in any kind of targeted financial aid for students. So getting just to this point where we've got $20 or $40 million working is good. I think where we want to head next is to expand both in scope and size. So who is eligible? We certainly think our community college students should be eligible, potentially even students attending any accredited university or college in the state might be able to go and use that Promise program. But also, we passed a proposition in Arizona last year, Proposition 308, which gave Dreamers the opportunity, if they'd graduated from a high school and been there at least 1 year, the opportunity to get in-state tuition. There's also a movement now to have those folks included, because today they are not eligible, even though they are receiving in-state tuition. We also have, like Roxanne mentioned, this breadth and depth of local Promise programs, some name Promise programs, some not at the community college level. They're all locally funded, though. And frankly, in Arizona, because our community colleges are so affordable, having a last dollar community college Promise program is not that impactful. It sounds great in theory, but there's very little real dollars given, especially when it's tuition only. So, but the politics of it are terrific. So we're trying to put all that together, and it's tricky. And Vince will talk a little bit about this more, but we have kind of a decentralized state, and so we have to work together and have to bring others with us to accomplish anything, because it's a state where when people say they want to do this, everybody's like, who is they? Like, we is they, right? So that's kind of how we have to look at it, and that's one of the things I think makes it halfway interesting in our space anyway to people who aren't from Arizona, is that we get anything accomplished.
I think to the point of, and maybe this is a good point. Maybe let me stop. How many of you all are part of a statewide Promise currently? Do you have a statewide program in place? It's okay. You can admit it. It's okay. How many do not have a statewide program in place? Okay, so we're 50-50, 60-40. So this is a good conversation to have here. I think you would agree that probably the work that you're doing within the state would not be possible if you did not have philanthropic sponsorship and support, right? Because for you all as well, braiding together all of these constituency groups there's usually someone that steps up. There's usually someone that steps up at a national level, a local level, and says, this is worth it. The ROI is there. I'm not putting Vince on the spot, but I kind of am, which is like, Vince, what made you say at Helios, Arizona, the most uncomplicated state in the country, is going to be where we're going to invest, right? This is the right investment at the right time for our foundation.
Thank you for that. And I wish I had a better answer, but the reason we're in Arizona is because that's essentially where the founding company that was converted was a student loan company that converted. That's where they did their loans. And so when that conversion happened, the founding board said, we're going to work in Arizona. So fast forward, I wasn't at Helios at that time. I'm very glad that I am now, because I get to do this work in Arizona, which is my home state. And frankly, I was one of these kids growing up that we're trying to impact. At our foundation, let me back up. Arizona is not a philanthropic rich state. It is a young state. It's state 48. That's what we call it. And there simply aren't a whole lot of funders, particularly funders at some scale, which creates, a lot of challenges, frankly. So at Helios, we sort of feel responsibility to use our philanthropy in ways that are really geared to have a statewide or at least a systems level impact. So by systems level, I mean, at least districts or collaborative districts in the K-12 space. We work directly with a lot of institutions to try to figure out ways to catalyze or incentivize actions that are going to increase college going and college completion. And it's incredibly challenging. But one of the things that I think we have going for us in Arizona is really a spirit of collaboration. Folks that work in the space want to work together. And that's powerful. I mean, here you have a major nonprofit in Arizona. You have a representative from the state, Board of Regents governing our institutions. and then a philanthropy. And this is very common, in terms of how we work in this particular space. We talked a little bit, or Rich mentioned sort of the decentralized nature of Arizona. This might be the case in some of your states. I'll paint a quick little picture for you on why this is a challenge, and talk a little bit about how that's a challenge in terms of our conversations around promise programs. So it's the Wild West. Okay, so in Arizona, we have 212 K-12 districts, each with their own elected governing boards. Some of those districts are K-8, some of those districts are K-12, some of those districts are 9-12, all over the map. We have about 700 different charter systems in the state, all with their own governing boards as well. We have 10 different community college systems, all with their own elected governing boards. We have 3 state universities. Thank God there's only one governing board there. And none of these systems talk to each other. So I'll give you, 2 sort of quick examples for some of the challenges. So many years ago, I used to work for the State Board of Education, and we were going through a process to redo high school graduation requirements and align them as close as possible to our Regents' entry requirements. Makes perfect sense. And I remember, during that work, we wanted to have a joint meeting, or at least a leadership meeting, between the State Board of Education and our Board of Regents. That had never happened before in Arizona until that particular meeting. That was in 2007. And to my knowledge, it hasn't happened since. Right? So just creating what would intuitively be a common sense thing to do, align your systems so that we benefit students, it's a challenge in Arizona, just by the way that we're set up. On the promise front, how this sort of plays out in the community college world is very complicated. Mayor Giles, who's the mayor of Mesa, has put together probably the most successful and perhaps best model in our community college system in Arizona, which is essentially funded by the city itself and local donors. There's no state money going into that particular promise program. But there are 9 other colleges in the Maricopa Community College system. It's a very large system. And there are 5 other promise programs serving other colleges in that system. So imagine being a student who lives in Phoenix. Who knows what system you might end up going, what community college you might go to Phoenix College, you might go to Rio, you might go to Estrella Mountain. Imagine navigating that. So what is my promise? How is it clear? How do I know exactly what I'm supposed to do? And speaking just frankly, the challenge for us as a philanthropy is trying to figure out how can we be helpful? How can we plug into a system that is so fragmented? And I can share, we have these very frank conversations with leadership, at the community college district. We'd love to be helpful, but we really don't know how until we figure out ways to better align what the community colleges are already doing. So we have a lot of challenges. Decentralization is one. State funding is another. It's sinful that the first state financial aid system in Arizona is the Promise program that Roxanne just described. There's no state aid for community colleges. We're all left to their own devices. So it's a very challenging system from that standpoint. But as I said, I think that despite all of that, we are starting to see some progress and move the ball down the field because we have a lot of great partners around the state who are willing to roll up their sleeves and work together.
So never afraid of tackling a problem. Rich with Education Forward Arizona is now, as they say in the military, the tip of the spear, right? You're basically now tackling these challenges and looking at ways of creating these coalitions and creating a path forward. What is your approach to these challenges, and where do you see some of the most opportunistic, activities before you right now?
Yeah, so I think we're seen as an organization that both calls the question, but then also either does something about it or helps bring together people to do something about it. That started our kind of evolution into that space as more of an intermediary, a catalyst, a convener. Probably started 3 years ago when, with the support of the community, we actually did a transaction or a transfer of 3 of the state's largest education nonprofits and brought them and merged them into one nonprofit. So it helped kind of defragment from the nonprofit side. So we put together College Success Arizona, which I was lucky enough to run. Expect More Arizona, which was the primary policy organization in the state, and Achieve 60AZ, the organization that promoted the goal. We brought them into one organization and renamed it and rebranded and started growing Education Forward Arizona. So I think what happened at that point was we became the voice of education at certain levels, especially around these like key transition points into post-secondary and then career success. And had a lot of great talent on board to help us do that, right? But the funders and people that we were talking to, including the media and legislators then, kind of could pay attention to one voice instead of maybe 3 different kind of voices, even if they were saying the same thing. You all know, if you work with legislators, that if they hear one word differently, they go, oh, you guys aren't on the same page, right? And so we kind of got over that. So now I think we're able to act as this intermediary, really, bringing business and education together on occasion, bringing partners together to be part of that solution. And so that's kind of how we're working about it, along with our programming. Like this year, we did 550 scholarships of our own for about $2.5 million.
I want to pull the string with what you just said, because I think it's important in many of your communities, and we work with many of you all in here, that you're seeing nonprofit consolidations happening in your environment. I think this is where, we talked how College Promise bumps up against economics, opportunity, higher ed. We have a lot of different interrelationships, but the nonprofit sector, of which many of you all are a part of, is going through its own transformation. So you're seeing massive and rapid consolidation and exits of nonprofits because, quite frankly, philanthropy and investment isn't happening in today's environment the way it did pre-COVID, right? I mean, there's some massive shifts, and frankly, organizations don't have the infrastructure sometimes to survive on their own. So these consolidations are strong strategic moves that committed partners are doing to really keep the ball moving forward. And Vince, I wonder if you can take a couple of minutes on this, because we hear it from a lot of our funders of that. Probably the consolidation step, not only was it selfless, but it probably was a good demand signal for you to say they're serious. They're really more about moving something forward and creating a clear line. I don't know if you had a reaction to that, if that was any part of your determination for investment.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, consolidations are a lot of times necessary. They're never a whole lot of fun. And I was involved in a lot of the conversations around the consolidation of the organizations that Rich mentioned. And if you're really mission focused, I think, sometimes you have to make those hard decisions. How can we consolidate in a way that makes the movement sustainable? I'm not talking necessarily about the organization, but the movement sustainable. And that movement is really what is the core mission of Education Forward now, Education Forward Arizona. Because as I said earlier, Arizona does not have a whole lot of major funders. And when you have a lot of organizations that are sometimes duplicating efforts, it just makes a whole lot of sense to do some consolidations, but at the same time make sure that you're preserving the core of what we're trying to accomplish.
Consolidations are usually much nicer than exits, meaning when organizations actually just go away abruptly because they're not financially sustainable, right? And so I think there are thoughtful ways of continuing a legacy and hopefully keeping brain trust involved, keeping really bright minds. I'm curious, just in the folks in the room, how many of you have 1 or 2 other nonprofits that oftentimes are either duplicative or kind of could be considered noisy in the conversation of what you're trying to do in your community? Or any of you finding yourself in that situation? Non-attribution, do any of you all find yourselves in that? It's okay to, yeah, one. Thank you, Chris. That's okay, yeah. So, I mean, I think, it's a tough one to answer, right? But I think it's something as you see some more programming on the College Promise Front national level, I think what we're hearing is that many of you are navigating the financial fundraising requirements, the financial realities of the complexities of multiple organizations in your space, kind of navigating that noise a little bit, and then ways of creating better synergies. And so that on top of mind. I think you all have figured that out. So on top of creating that consolidation, what other challenges are you tackling?
I think the biggest challenge we're tackling right now, really the core of our work, is really helping business and education understand how they can merge some of their work and what that looks like. I think each has seen themselves kind of going down the same path, but parallel to each other many times. And one thing that we know is that because of this big degree gap we have and because of the pipeline, business is starting to get intensely interested in solutions. I think the last 5 years we've seen education moving at a slow pace as far as change goes, but trying. And we've seen business really believing their role is to complain about education. So we've got to that's not going to work. So really the challenge right now when it comes is bringing those groups together, getting them to agree to work together, and then making a plan on how we get to. So we're kind of at that stage now, and that involves all this programming we're talking about, right? Affordability issues, promise programs, all the other policy, dual enrollment, looking at absenteeism like Vincent's doing in his shop. So like the policy and the tools have to support this movement between business and education to come together to actually solve the problem. And they're the ones who can do it, right? I've heard people say here, we got big business like Boeing. Well, we have a Boeing. We got other people that they're relying on, but you have to get them bought in. And if you don't get them bought in, then it's going to be the same story.
In terms of other issues that we're tackling, I think it's a good time to sort of raise at least something I believe firmly, which is, if you want to really meaningfully increase college going and college attainment, you have to take the long view. You can only do so much if you're focused exclusively in that high school to college transition space. You have to strengthen the pipeline behind it. And so Rich put up in one of his slides the Arizona Progress Meter, right? And while we don't have a statewide plan, we do have a roadmap for what we need to do to increase college going and college attainment. And so it starts with access to quality early child care. It's third grade reading. It's eighth grade math. It's all of those things that folks that work in the education space know. It's just in our bones. We talk about it all the time. But if you really want to meaningfully increase college going and college attainment, you have to start early because there's only so much our interventions are going to do at the last second.
I think that I know also just to not quit on this promise piece, what needs to happen this year. I was having a talk with Roxanne, I forget what the number is, but we kind of know what it's going to cost to fully fund it. Are you at liberty to share that?
Yeah, if we look at what it would fully cost, it's about $153 million. And we're getting about $40 million. So, sustainability is about funding this scholarship.
That's just university funding.
Keeping it how it is. And we know that we need to expand it too. So, and just to piggyback off of that too, in terms of the funding piece and I guess really thinking too about what expansion could look like. I will say one of the great things about the Promise program is that it actually has forced us to have conversations with the community colleges, especially those community colleges that already have existing Promise programs. And because as we hope to have the Promise program expand, we want to do it in the right ways. And the community colleges have really shared, we we have this part of the Promise program supporting, Arizona graduating high school students with receiving these funds. What we want to do is look at our adult student population, which I think is, not part of the conversation right now, but it has to be like to reach 60% attainment. Like we have to look at adults and think about how we support them. And then also as we really think about the 4-year degree pathway too, and increasing the number of 4-year degrees, like what are we going to do for our transfer students? As Rich was sharing, like we have a pretty low cost community colleges. And so students, when they go to make that transfer to the 4-year institution, there are very, very limited dollars to support them on that pathway. And in some ways, it almost feels like they're being punished for taking that 2-year pathway and then transferring to our 4-year institution. Like we have to do better in terms of getting them the funding that they need to make that transition. And then the last one that I'll just say too is really our online student population. I mean, we heard from the student before, like online degrees matter. They matter very much so. We have a very large student population that's pursuing online degrees. And so what does that look like? Because right now the Arizona Promise program is only for first-time, full-time students who are on one of our main campuses or our community campuses across the state, but we know that we're missing a huge population of students. But in order to actually think about expanding the program, there's going to be, there needs to be a significant investment in dollars. Then I'll just share too, and I'm not, for those that have a state-based financial aid program, even this last legislative session, like everyone wanted their hands on the Promise dollars, and but one of the things with our 4-year institutions or community colleges who are trying to get in there too is there was no request to actually increase the number of dollars if there were going to be more people pulling from that pot of funds. And that has to happen. We can't add in additional partners without investing in growing the program. So just some thoughts there.
So as I've gotten to know your programs and how you're navigating a little bit more, one of your strengths and superpowers in kind of creating more cohesion has been the use of data, right? And really creating data sets. Many of you have talked during the breaks and during some of the sessions that we need to have a greater, access to and a more democratized use of data, especially within the movement. I'm going to pause and say that in addition to funding, part of what Helios has brought to the table has been creating an infrastructure of data as a philanthropic partner that's used within the state piece. And I think that is a unique, they're really side by side, rolling up their sleeves, engaged in this. And so part of the let's say, additional topic conversation that I think is really important to Arizona is how has philanthropy use data and help build an infrastructure of data to help the state and the movement. And so, Vince, I think this is your moment to talk a little bit about how you've used your resources for the good of the state.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So data quality in Arizona has been a pain point since forever. No matter which system, and again, we don't have joint systems. We have sort of an early ed craziness, which is there's no real governance outside of licensing there. We have the K-12 system, we have community colleges, we have higher eds. And none of the systems are linked. None of the systems really talk to each other. And in the K-12 world, a lot of the data has frankly historically been unreliable. From a policy perspective, that's sort of my background, working in the K-12 world. It created constant challenges. In the philanthropic sector, it creates constant challenges. I think for nonprofits, anyone trying to do good work that's rooted in data, it's just a roadblock. And so about 5 years ago, in partnership with ASU, Arizona State University, we created a new center, which is called the ASU Helios Decision Center for Educational Excellence. The goal of this center is to fix that problem that I just laid out, which was, when we created this, incredibly ambitious. How can we improve data quality, and how can we make those data usable and help systems use those data to improve educational outcomes across the continuum. And so we started through this process. I can't see this where I'm at. There we go. I'm putting this up here to acknowledge first that Helios is the funder of this work. We do not do the work. I'm not going to go through the folks at the center. These are the folks that actually constitute the center, come into work every day, and have really, I think, changed the game, not just for philanthropy or for higher ed, but really for education generally in Arizona with some of the things that the center's been able to do. So the first piece, I'm going to break this into two pieces, the first piece was really data acquisition, collecting data, cleaning data, making sure that it was usable. Once we have that, and it took quite some time, and it took building partnerships with our state agencies, the Board of Regents, Departments of Education, community colleges. Once we had that, there's an incredible tool called the Decision Theater, which is it's a semicircular room. You're kind of getting a sense, I think, from the picture here, that these data experts and visualization experts at the university are able to build these tools, these visualization tools that really make it possible to consume massive amounts of data in very understandable forms, in very understandable ways. I mean, even I understand most of the stuff that's going on in there. And this is a picture of the decision theater that we actually had built on the Helios Education campus in Phoenix. And so the goal of this particular theater, and the reason we built our own theater, is we wanted these tools and these data to be made available to anyone in the state that is doing good work to help improve education outcomes in Arizona. How we're going about this. So now that we have access to data and we're working on linking the data, we are building a series of visualization tools. Each puzzle piece here is one of those tools, and you can see it's very linear, right? So from early education to K-8 to middle school, high school, and then on to our colleges, universities, and the workforce. The idea being that we will collect the best data, we will build usable and useful tools for our partners in the state that would encapsulate the entire education continuum. So no matter what you do, no matter what work you're engaged in, there is something there to help better inform your work. And it's been, right now we're still in the building phase. It's been 5 years. We have two of these visualizations built. The first, the high school outcomes tool and the education and workforce module. Those are the two that are active. In the next month, we'll have another major visualization built. And the response in the community has been tremendous. For most school districts, and even for a number of our institutions, particular community colleges, it's the first time they've really had access to these types of data in ways that is usable, in ways that can really help inform what they do in their particular schools or in their institutions. So the next tool, as I just mentioned, that we're rolling out is a tool that actually connects the best education or the best workforce data to our colleges and universities. It is an incredibly sophisticated tool that takes a look at the entirety of the Arizona economy, every single industry and every single occupation within those industries. And you can get a glimpse of what is right now in terms of what does the workforce look like, what industries are growing, what industries are weak and declining. And it changes the way we believe institutions will be able to plan ahead for the needs of tomorrow. And so the way the tool is sort of laid out, you can take a deep dive into any particular industry in Arizona, gain some insights. You can do the same with every single occupation within those industries. And perhaps the most, I think, exciting piece of it is with every occupation, we can actually look at similar jobs that would provide a better wage and put you at less risk for automation, right? So imagine a scatter plot, if you would, for just a second, and looking at all of the occupations in the manufacturing sector, for example. A whole lot of those occupations are at high risk for automation within the next 5 years. A staggering number of those jobs, and they almost overlap completely, don't pay a livable wage for a single person, and certainly not a livable wage for a single person with a dependent. And what we've been able to do, what the center has been able to do, is actually say, for every one of these occupations that's at high risk for automation and that doesn't pay a livable wage, can we identify other jobs that increase your pay and that are not at risk for automation over the next 5 years? And once we do that, can we identify the skills gap between this job and the job moving forward? And for about 30% of all the occupations, and we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of different occupations, that's been done right now. And from our standpoint, that could be a game changer, not just for individuals to learn what they need to do to upskill in order to thrive in the economy, but for institutions, right? From a planning perspective, if you're an institution and you can see a critical mass of jobs that are likely to be automated in the next 5 years, and you can see the skills that need to be taught or acquired by those individuals in that time frame, I think it creates an opportunity to really change how institutions, how our colleges and universities plan to meet the demands of the workforce. And so we're really excited about this particular module or visualization. It's being really used for the first time right now with one of our community colleges in Central Phoenix, but excited to sort of roll that out on a broader scale. I'll go through this quickly. In addition to the visualizations, which really are a lot of fun and very engaging, because we now have access to a lot of data, student-level data, throughout the system, and we've been able to link those data, we can do some things that we never could do before. So one of these projects that we call them impact projects is the screens that you see behind me. This is a visualization, but it's also a report. We call them post-secondary feedback reports. And so for the first time in Arizona, we've been able to link our K-12 students with our college and university data. And every high school in Arizona, every school district in Arizona gets a report now annually that shows them exactly what happens to their students when they leave their institution and enter a college or university in Arizona, right? So if you think about it from a principal standpoint, and I think most states are probably in a similar situation, if you're a principal, historically, the only data you've ever seen regarding whether or not you did a good job educating your students and prepared them for post-secondary education is the state test, which is usually English language arts and math. That's it. And schools, as you all know, do a whole lot more than just English and math. And so what this report allows schools to see is what schools did their students go to? Where do they choose to enroll? What are they majoring in? What is their success rate in chemistry or CTE or physics or anything else? And it really has changed how principals and superintendents can now manage their schools, not just to math and English, things that we assess, but how can you take a broader look at your students, your actual students, and plan to see what changes you can make to improve your systems. And then the last piece I'll talk about, and this is the one I'm most excited about, is an automatic admissions work in Arizona. So I'll walk through this as quickly as I can, but because we have, again, these data, we know which students have met the Board of Regents requirements for admission to our university. So every high school student in Arizona, we know whether or not they've taken all the necessary courses. We know if they have the correct or the adequate GPA. So we know whether or not they would be admitted if they apply to one of our 3 state institutions. So ASU, University of Arizona, and Northern Arizona University. And so originally partnering with one of our districts in Phoenix, we ran a pilot with ASU, and ASU agreed to automatically admit every student within that district if the center verified that they met the entrance requirements without those students ever applying. No application fee, nothing. And so how that worked was once the data were run, the data cannot be shared it doesn't leave the Department of Education. So the data happened, the analysis happens in the Department of Education. No data goes to the institutions. They're completely trusting the work of the center to do these verifications. And unsolicited, students received a letter that said, congratulations, you've done the work. You're a Sun Devil if you want to be, ASU. And that first year was tremendously successful. So in that pilot district, there were about 1,400 students that received an admission letter. About half of those students were Sun Devils in the next fall. A tremendous response. Other students went out of state, chose other institutions, which is fantastic, but it showed the impact. And over the next 2 years, and this will be our 3rd year, it's now grown to about a little over 30 school districts in Arizona. Over half of our high school seniors are now screened to see if they meet those requirements, and it includes all 3 universities. So right now, actually, last month, letters went out to students. They received, if they met those requirements, they received 3 admission letters. Again, no application fee, no application, unsolicited, saying, we want you in our institutions. Here's what you need to do to enroll and get your financial aid started. And this, for in-state admissions in Arizona, it's completely sort of put it on its head. It's really changed how our universities admit students. And we're incredibly excited about this particular work and working to expand it statewide.
Vince, this is for you. When you all did this project, which I think is remarkable, did the letters come from you? Because the schools can't get that information, right?
Correct. So I want to be very clear. This was very well lawyered. We're within the FERPA requirements. There are agreements that go with the school districts. And from a data perspective, but yeah, the data never leave the Department of Education, right? So the Department of Education has all of the data for students and whether or not what their courses are, what their GPA is, all of that. The letters go on university letterhead, but that information, the student names, none of it ever goes to an institution. It was pretty complicated putting all of this together. But frankly, it was through the work of the center and the credibility that they had built over a series of years around the state that they trusted the center enough to say, hey, if you guys verify it, you can put it on our letterhead and actually have a sample letter here if you want to see it.
Hello. Does the tool interact with data on tribal communities and undocumented populations, and how does it interact with that information?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it depends on the tool. So the first tool we built was the high school outcomes module. That was built first because that's where the good data were. Those data were all publicly available information, so that's not student level, right? Now, it does allow you to select any community or group of communities that you want to look at. So you could select particular tribal communities, particular schools, as long as they're public schools, so BIE schools are not included, to look at outcomes for those particular communities, so it is very nimble. Other tools have student-level data in it, the post-secondary feedback reports that I showed you, and those can only be shared with the district where those students attended. And so there's really strict protocols around those particular tools.
I will say that we have had the entire Dene Navajo Education Council in the drum before, and they also understand some of the limitations, and also the Dene, the Navajo, that crosses over kind of the Four Corners area, so it's not all in Arizona too. So when you're talking about the nation, you have Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, maybe. And so that complicates it a little, but as long as that information is public or in one of those counties, they found it had tremendous value for them.
Martha Cantor.
Just a quick question. I noticed in your slides that you use the word parity and equality. And I'm just wondering if that's a piece of advice when we're talking to people that, are the anti-DEI folks. And was that like an intentional, there was one other word you used, I can't remember it right now, but I remember parity and equality.
So our organization is founded in this belief that everybody in our state should have options and an excellent path to choose those options. And it is all founded, frankly, in this idea of equity in education preparation, access, and success. So we also have a campaign that we are investing heavily in called Everything to Gain, which takes all this data that we got and then starts building messaging frameworks for different personas in our state. And so we message test the heck out of words like parity and equality and equity and things like that. And so this is kind of part of the message testing in some way to see how that sounds to people and how people react to that. Because in Arizona, and much like other states here too, not just Arizona, those terms mean different things to different people. And we want to make sure that we're bringing people together, not dividing people through terminology. So even the word college has become kind of a barrier word, right? So we're saying education after high school. So the wording is intentional in many cases, but it also evolves and changes depending on how people react to it and what we're trying to accomplish. So good catch, Martha.
For those of you, I'm going to ask Matt Bashad in the back. Can you raise your hand and wave? So he supports College Promise on our policy and research side of the house. If any of you all, and I'm not putting Vince on the spot because we've talked about this before, but we intend to pull together some site visits and really dig into this decision center, some of the pilot work that's happening in Lynchburg with career acceleration. Dr. David Troutman's doing incredible work using data, historical data of education workforce outcomes in the state of Texas. If you're at all interested in using data and becoming better informed, especially in your programming, go to Matt. He's going to capture your names and information, and then we will be in touch as we start solidifying some of these site visits and opportunities to get a little bit, to roll up our sleeves and get a little bit deeper into this. So wave one more time, Matt, just so everybody knows who you are. All right. Any other questions before I'm going to give Rich the last word here? Any other comments or questions? Rich, would you take the last word for the panel?
Yes, first, thanks for the 99% of you all that stayed in the room. I know this could be a little dry sometimes, especially when we're trying to explain our situation in terms that might be palatable to you. So we get that. But I want to thank Roxanne for for her partnership, and the Board of Regents for their partnership, and Helios for their partnership. We actually are housed on the Helios Education Camp. It's a beautiful building. It's really a gift to the community. It includes things like this center, some really tremendous first-class convening space that's used often. And what the impressive thing is, I think, about this collaborative, and believe me, this is just three of us. There's like this loose confederation of people who care that all work together. When Helios isn't funding the Promise program directly. The vision to fund things like this center, which gives us data forever, or to fund things like system change around dual enrollment, or some of these other things, that's what's made Helios a good partner. And they're also there to, they're in it with us. So it's not like a from on high type of approach. So that's, I think that's the cool thing. We're lucky to have this partnership, even though we would also love to have a strong coordinating body in our state. But it does give us an opportunity to be impactful and to make a difference. So I think that for us, we see that as an opportunity. So thanks again for having us. We hope that it was interesting, and we're happy to talk more about it for sure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much to our leaders from Arizona. All right.